Good morning, girls. Boy, you're wide awake. You must have been up real early. Did you have a good night's sleep on the Trundle bed? Yeah? Great. You know, a lot of people use these to store toys and slip them underneath the bed. But Sophie and Allie really like them for their sleepovers. And as you can see, they even use them as a play area with a lot of their toys. Now, breakfast is going to be ready in a few minutes, so I'll see you downstairs, okay? I want to get started today by making the post for the bed. So I went down to my wood supplier and picked up poplar. It's a very stable wood, and it paints up nicely. I bought some 8-quarter poplar and glued it up into a blank for the legs. But it's not perfectly true. This dimension may not be parallel, and this dimension may not be the correct width. And the boards don't quite line up with each other. So what I want to do is size them. And there's a whole sequence to that process. First, I start on the surface side. I'll run it through my surface planer, just taking off a little bit of material. Then I'll mark that side to make sure I don't plane it twice. Run the other 3 pieces through, then turn each piece over, run the other side through until I end up with a finished thickness of 3 inches. When all 4 pieces are done, we'll start working on the edges. The first operation on the edges is a pass through the joiner, and that's so that the edge will be perpendicular to the faces I just planed. Now for the 4th and final surface, I return again to the surface planer, and I'm going to run the face opposite the edge I just ran through the joiner, and that'll give me the final dimension I want. Now to square up the ends of the post, I turn to my miter box. Take a look at this. It's not a line on the wood. That's actually a beam of light being projected by a laser. And depending how I set it, it'll either cut just to the left or the right of the blade. We'll give it a try. At the head and footboard, there's a cross rail that joins the post, and that connection is made with a mortise and tenon joint. Now, the next thing to do is to cut the mortise. I could use a drill and hand chisel it out, or I could use a mortising attachment at my drill press, but I'm going to use a tool that's dedicated to mortising. Now, this is just a 1/2-inch square chisel with a drill bit in the center. The drill bit starts to remove the material, and the chisel simply squares it up. I want a 3/4 inch wide mortise, so I've turned the piece around, and now I'll make a pass along the other edge. A similar mortise is needed to receive this 3/4 inch headboard, except instead of being 2 inches deep, it's 1 inch deep. The rails at the headboard and the footboard are made up of 1.5 inch thick by 5 inch wide poplar. And now I want to make tenons on each end to fit into those mortises I milled. First thing to do is to make what is called the shoulder cut along each face. The next thing to do is make the shoulder cut along the top and bottom edge of the piece. And while it's at the saw, I'll complete the edge of the tenon. To complete the tenons, all I have to do is make the cheek cuts. For that, I use my tenoning jig, which rides in the grooves of the table saw and holds the piece vertical. The headboard is made from what is known as MDO plywood. It's a quality plywood with a thin paper coating on each side, and it's ideal for painting, even though it's very expensive. What I want to do is cut that arch in a blank piece, just using my jigsaw. To conceal the plywood edge of the headboard, I added and bent a piece of maple over the top of it. And the first thing I want to do is round over the four edges of a blank strip. And to do that, I'm going to use my router table, which I set up with a 1/4 inch rounding over bit. Now, with the stacked dado head cutter set up in my table saw for a 3/4 inch width, I'm going to run a groove down the center of the piece of maple to slip over the plywood. Now that was a 22.5-degree angle cut, and that should make the maple fit properly against the post. Now what I'm going to do is clamp it in place so that I can bend it around the top of the headboard to mark the other end. And your prayers would be appreciated at this time. Okay, now I just need to mark it. Okay, that should work. With the same 1/4 inch router bit set up in my router table, I'm taking the trouble to ease all the sharp corners. Now, I think it's a good time to do some final sanding, because once these pieces are assembled, it's very difficult to get in the corners where the pieces join. Now for a little assembly. First, I want to put the piece of maple on top of the headboard and clamp it in place. Well, now let's see if we can get this into that post. Okay, 59 and 9/16 in that direction. 59 that way, and 9/16, so we're square. The footboard's a lot easier to put together, just one rail. Well, now I'll just set these aside to dry and start working on the long rails. The long rails are connected to the head and footboard with some pieces of hardware. This piece in the rail has hooks on it, and it's mortised in. There's another piece mortised into the post with slots. So when you assemble the bed, just slip it together and drive it down. Now to make the mortise in the end of the rail, I'm just using my router, which is set up with a collar and a 3/8 inch straight bit. The collar just rides around the inside of this 1/4 inch plywood jig that I've attached to the end of the rail with just a couple screws. Now in order for the piece of hardware to fit in the mortise, I need one more little area removed, right where these rivets are. And I'll do that with a drill. Okay, let's check the fit on that. Now that fits great. 3 more to go. Well, I've mortised the ends for the hardware. I've rounded the edges of the rail. And the last thing to do is put this cleat on, which is going to support the mattress foundation. Now, using the same mortising jig I used earlier to do the rails, I'm mortising each post. And I chisel out the corners to square them up once again. Now this is the piece of hardware that goes in the post. And it has a couple slots for the corresponding piece to fit into. I need to remove the material in the area of the slot so that the piece will fit in. That's a job for the mortiser. That's great. Well, I thought I'd get started this morning by completing my headboard. And I've just made a couple mortises in the lower portion of the leg to receive this maple rub rail. And that'll allow the trundle to slide in without hitting the legs. Now, this is such a good fit that I think glue alone is all I need to hold it in place. Well, now for the trundle that'll slide under the bed. It has 4 sides made up of more 3/4 inch MDO plywood. Now, to conceal the top edge of the plywood, I'm going to install this T-molding made out of maple, and that'll sit in a groove. But on the ends, I don't want to make a groove because that'll weaken the point where I have to connect it to the short pieces. So I'm just going to install a thin strip of maple with some glue and brads. Now notice that I stopped the groove just short of the end. That's because I don't want the tongue of the T-piece to show through. I made the slot using my router, which is set up with a slot cutting bit and a bearing as a guide. Let me show you how we're going to join the sides and ends of the trundle. I'm just going to use a simple butt joint, but it has to be strong because it's going to get pulled in and out all the time. So I'm going to turn to a piece of hardware that commercial furniture makers use called a connector bolt. There are 2 components, this pin, which will get recessed into the side piece, and this bolt, which you drive through the front piece and through the pin. With this much wood between the side and the front, I know that that's going to be a strong joint. The first thing I want to do is make a counterbore to recess the head of the bolt. Now that's the 1/4 inch through hole necessary for the bolt. Here I've switched bits once again, and I'm working on the ends of the trundle, drilling the holes for the cross dowel of that connector. To further strengthen the joint and align it, I'm going to use a biscuit. Well, now we're ready for some glue. I'll place the end in position and just clamp it for now. Now the idea here is to drill a 1/4 inch hole through to the dowel hole. Use my square as a little bit of a guide. Now let's see if all the holes align. First the cross dowel, which goes in the hole of the side piece. Now, to make sure it's set up in the right position, I just use a screwdriver and hold the slot in the direction of the bolt, and the bolt goes in. If I'm lucky, we get the threads started, which are now in there. Good. Now, the Allen wrench is all I need to tighten it up. Now that is going to make a really strong joint. Now these cleats that go around the inside of the trundle will support the mattress, and they'll also give you a place to attach the casters, to roll it around. Here I'm installing swivel casters. And the only thing I have to keep in mind is that the caster does not stick by the side of the bed, so it won't hit the post when I pull it out. The support system for the mattress and the trundle are just 1x2 pieces of number 2 pine, spaced about 2.5 inches. Here I'm making the T-molding, which will conceal the plywood edges. This will actually be 2 pieces, one on each side. It's safer to run a wide piece. One more pass through the dado head cutter, and then I just split it in half. Now with all the T-molding dry fitted, that's as far as I'm going to go with it now, because I'm going to paint this plywood and leave the molding natural, so I'll glue it in later. I also want to cover up the heads of those connector bolts, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that. Now this is what is known as a 3/4 inch plug cutter. Now that I've made enough blanks in this piece of maple, I'm going to take it to the saw and cut them so they're all the same thickness. Yeah, that's going to look good. Now I like to have them stand proud of the surface a bit. I'm not going to glue them in right now. I'll wait till after the base is painted. There's one more thing to do, and that's to take some blocks of maple and make some decorative caps for the top of these posts. With my saw blade tipped to a 15-degree angle, and starting with a piece of maple that's 3.5 inches wide and long enough for 4 blocks, I'll make 2 passes. Now that gives me a piece that's exactly 3.5 by 3.5. I've attached my square block to a scrap piece of plywood with one screw in the center. And that's so I can bevel the other two edges and keep my hands away from the blade. Now I have a hip-topped block. Now after the blocks have been sanded smooth, I need to drill a couple holes. And those will be for the screws that I'll use to attach the blocks to the post. And then I'll plug those holes. Well, now you can see where those maple plugs fill the screw holes. All the poplar and MDO surfaces will first get a coat of latex enamel underbody. And after that dries, then we'll put on the color. After the sanding sealer and the primer dried completely, I sanded all the parts with some 120 grit sandpaper, vacuumed it clean, and then tacked off any leftover dust. I put a final coat of polyurethane on all the maple parts, and now I'm applying the color coat. This is a latex enamel paint. It goes on smoothly over this poplar. The color is apple green. Should be really easy to clean up and pretty tough. I sure hope the kids like it. Boy, I sure wish I had a trundle bed when I was a kid. I can remember the sleepovers with my friends out on the front porch on a fixed spring cot. Boy, those things were uncomfortable. Now, next time we're going to build an updated version of an old-fashioned child's toy, the marble roll. That's next time, right here on the New Yankee Workshop.